Howdy, friends, and welcome to The Story Field. This is a podcast where we talk about business, faith, and life in general.
Okay, so here's the deal. We want you to be encouraged. We want you living in hope. This life we live is complex. It's hard at times. At The Story Field, you will find great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you. Our goal is that you leave encouraged, inspired, and excited to move forward in life. But before we get started, one thing though, if you're listening and you find yourself really hopeless right now, send us an email at hope@thestoryfield.com so we can pray for you. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started.
Okay, Storyfield. Welcome, Blaine Eldredge. Blaine, I'm really excited today, man. Yeah, thanks for making time today.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking this morning, Blaine, and this wasn't on purpose, but knowing that you are such a big bow hunter, I had some deer sausage for breakfast this morning that my son shot last year. So I was like, man, that's a fitting way to start this interview for you.
Oh, that is perfect. I put a deer roast in the crock pot this morning, so we were live that.
Heck yeah, there we go.
Congratulations, by the way, you guys, on 50 shows not long ago. Major milestone and a big deal. Well done, you two.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, so we'll get into a little bit of some of the stuff that you've accomplished at your age, but you've taken the excuse away from a lot of young men. You're 32 and you just launched a book called The Paradise King. That's incredible, man. I'm proud of that for you. But why this book and why now? Like, let's just talk about it for a second and then we're going to dive into the story and kind of just jump around. But why this book and why now?
Yeah, great question. We'll have to circle back around to failure very quickly so that I can give young men an excuse again.
No, don't do it.
We'll just say that.
Okay, yeah, get going.
I can assure you I am very normal, actually. Why this book? I never meant to write this book. And so this is what happened. I grew up in a family of writers, which is a wonderful thing. I have 2 young kids, and so a lot of my reading right now is about parenting. And one idea that comes up over and over again is that what you love will imprint upon your children far more than what you say. So kids can detect the unspoken value system of a family. I see you nodding. I think we know this is
100%.
true.
Yeah, keep
You
on.
can ask them what matters. I had parents that loved story and loved theater, so the writing bug was there from an early time. But I was reading several years ago Daniel 2, a thing I'd done many times, but I'm a history nerd, and I had been reading about the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is well worth your time. Nebuchadnezzar II has an arch nemesis named Shin-Shurushkun, who's a king of the Medes. You could not pick a better antagonist for one of the great emperors of history. And the Medo-Babylonian War is an apocalyptic human war with all of these fascinating things that happen. So that was in the background. I'm in the Bible, and I see verse 1, Daniel 2, verse 1. In the 2nd year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled. His sleep left him. That is an amazing beginning, and the pacing of that story is perfect. Magicians, dialogue, arguments that cut to Daniel. I couldn't tell you what was happening, but afterwards I ran into this old English cardinal, John Henry Newman. This is a guy who by the age of 14 was reading people like David Hume and disagreeing with them and able to beat them. So you want to say taking the excuse away from young men. Here's a truly brilliant man. And he thought that people had what he called the illative sense. And it's a fancy word for the ability of people to sense when they are in the presence of something beautiful or holy or numinous or otherworldly. And he says we feel it in the beauty of nature. We feel it watching children sleep. We feel it when we hear about a soldier's heroic sacrifice. We are wired by God to perceive transcendence. For reasons that I do not know, besides the kindness of God, the illative sense turned on, dialed up to 11 that morning, and I could feel the pulse, this current in the biblical story, but I did not know what it was. In particular, I did not know some of the complexities and the beauty of the biblical story as a meta-narrative. Most people, when they hear the Bible, at least if they're like me, don't think psychological drama, intellectual sophistication, thriller.
Yeah.
But it is all of those things. So I'm sorry, I'm going so long at answering your first question.
No, keep going, man. I love this. No, I love this. Keep going.
I wanted to share what I had seen, so I started as a storyteller trying to tell people the stories. And I'm the guy who wants to talk history with his friends kind of all the time. I want to say, hey, you know that the only way to trace the Viking diaspora across places like Iraq, they got so far east, is by finding memorial stones cut with Viking runes in strange places. And some of them have poems on it. And the coolest poem that I know of is, I think, in Kazakhstan along a river, there's a Viking runestone, and it says the woman's name, and it says she raised this in memorial to her sons. They traveled like men, far for gold, and in the east gave food to the eagle.
Oh my God.
That's all it says. I love that. So I thought, man, we can maybe talk about my friends with, ancient history as it relates to the Bible, but there is a gravity well at the center of the biblical narrative named Jesus of Nazareth. And if you dive in, you will be swept there. So I eventually realized that I was going to have to write about Jesus to give some sense of the whole, to tell these stories, which I did not want to do for several reasons. But in the end, and after much travail, I wound up doing that.
Oh, man, this is beautiful. You've already given me a lesson. I bet it's fun to be your friend around around the campfire, man, hearing some of this. So, okay, the book has released. It's called The Paradise King. Back us up 30,000 feet and give us the high level. What is it about? And then I'm going to take us back to the ground and back a few years. So give us the high level.
Yeah, thank you. Because true to your vibe, it comes out of a story. But the subtitle of the book is The Tragic History and Spectacular Future of Everything According to Jesus of Nazareth, which is the way that I would subtitle the Bible. If you pick up the Bible, you should know that you're about to hear a story about the nature and purpose of reality, and that you're going to learn the tragic history and future of everything read through the key of human existence, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, the Messiah. What the book does is trace Genesis to Revelation, not unlike the sleeve tattoo of our wonderful audio engineer, Micah, which some of the things that I just saw on his arm would have been a great cover for this book, because I begin say, the Bible has many themes: the dwelling place of God with man, the institution of prophecy, sacrifice and sin. But perhaps the big theme is God's desire for a covenant partner, why he made humanity in the first place, and then how he works with humanity over time to restore the original design, culminating in the arrival of the only fully human being, who is Jesus. And I tell that by zooming in on the stories of 5 figures from the Old Testament canon, and then spending, the second half of the book talking about Jesus.
Hey, y'all. I just want to make an observation. When I see someone going through a legal situation, it seems like there are way too many unknowns. Well, the Allen firm provides legal guidance so that you can make a great decision, come to a resolution, and be at peace. For more information about the Allen firm, visit allenlawfirm.com.
This is awesome, Blaine. If I could put that title, you know, how you described that originally onto your Bible, like here's what you're picking up. Man, it makes you want to pick it up and be like, let's get into this tale. This is amazing. Yeah, that's
Isn't
awesome.
it? It's an
Yeah. Oh,
incredible promise. It is an incredible promise. When the 1611 King James was coming out, the editors of that project released some pamphlets alongside the Bible, and they had spent years ruminating in the text via translation. And I love what they said. They were trying to convey how shocked they were by what that artifact was. And they said it's probably the most startling gift that has ever been given to humanity, because it, not always in a straightforward way, to be sure, sometimes in a difficult or ancient literary way, but it lays bare the nature and purpose of reality. Now, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy on every page to engage. I often have a hard time making sense of the harder parts in particular, but it is. I told my wife recently that I'm like, I think the way to get our kids interested in the Bible is not to tell them very much about it. Let's just have an untranslated version of Daniel on a shelf somewhere, and they're going to find this book, and it's written in two ancient languages. It's in Hebrew, and then in the middle it switches languages, and then it goes back. And they'll be like, what's this? And they're seeing these characters that look like they're from a fantasy story, and I'll say, oh, that's nothing. Don't worry about that. It's just a story about some captives that culminates in a prophecy. And the prophecy happens to be referred to at length by Jesus Christ. Don't worry about it, though. Leave it where it is.
Dude, you just did your second book. I just know what your next book is going to be about. It's going to be a kid series.
Oh, yeah.
Just place this anywhere.
Yeah, just leave this around. Don't look at this.
Around.
Micah, we need to take that snapshot out of this and figure out how to, like, that was beautiful. Okay. Man, I want to give you a minute to, and this is the first time I've ever done this with somebody in the show, and it's probably going to be kind of weird for you, but I'm okay with that if you are. I want you to brag on yourself for a minute to date. Like, give me some things you're really most proud of, the Lord using and accomplishing yourself. What are you most proud of accomplishing to your life to this point? I'm letting you say your own biography here, and I've never asked that, so sorry that's weird. I know that's hard and weird, but anyway, can you
you guys had to write one not too long ago, I'm sure. And so you know how hard this is.
I want you to write your own, yeah.
So I saw the ones on your site. Well, there's two, there's the snapshot that I know, credibility indicators. Who is this person? Let me tell you an interesting story, though. I'm in an elevator at the University of British Columbia because in this terrible brutalist tower called Buchanan Tower in Vancouver, in Canada, these two departments that had no relationship to each other apart from me at that time were on different levels. And on, I think it was level 5 of what was called Buto, was the English department where I was doing rhetoric, and then on level 7 or 9 or something was the economics department. And I'm on the elevator and I'm trying to understand this philosophy student as he's telling me about 3 layers of reality. I know don't worry, this is going to be highly actionable, guys. Whenever anyone says philosophy, I fall into a stage 1,
You almost lost me there for a second, Mike. You said 3 levels of philosophy. No, keep going.
Okay, but this is so all he's trying to communicate is that, listen, there is the factual, the narrative, and the actual. And the thinnest layer of reality is Blaine Eldredge holds a master's degree in rhetoric and language from the University of British Columbia. He studied stock market algorithms, how to make them act more like people. And Blaine has started several journaling and publication platforms, in particular for young men trying to take on the nature of Jesus in the wild time of the 20s. Blaine is a homesteader. He has some cows, some chickens, a horse, dog, some cats that are always wandering off and dying. 2 kids, a wife of 9 years, right? That's all the factual level. And then you would get, and so that's the thinnest level. Then you go into the narrative, which would be, man, at 32, I feel like I'm slowly beginning to develop a life where my time reflects my priorities. And it's taken a really long time, more than a decade, earnestly trying. I live pretty remote. The closest thing to my house that has a place to sit is a Starbucks inside a Safeway in a nearby farm town called Falcon. And so my daughter and I were there because now we're there on Wednesday mornings, and on the way there, we make up a story together. And when we get there and get, our steamed almond milks and coffees from Roberto, we draw the pictures then. So like always walk in with a bunch of art supplies and take over this desk.
Perfect.
And even driving back today, and just happiness that I felt over, man, there are some things in the way that I spend my time that are starting to look the way they would if what I did reflected what mattered to me. So kid time is online. Date nights are online. We're at 9 years, and it was year 9 that, we're going into year 10, quite a ways into year 10, that basic thing older couples tell you to do and is, very remedial. We got it, man. And it's very simple because we're in a season of kind of voluntary poverty. So all we do is take a walk, but we're doing it. So those would be some narratives that might display a little more. And then the actual factual narrative and actual would be, you'd have to come to my little homestead in the basin where I live. And we love saunas, actually. My wife is descended from tribal Finns, so sauna's a thing for her family. The guy that lives with us right now is a carpenter who has like a Finnish sauna business. He needed a model. He built one here. I'm saying it's sauna. There's been an intense debate among our friends if it's sauna or sauna. It turns out both are correct. So
we're from Texas, so we would
both
say,
I know.
right.
I was barely understanding.
Sauna.
Yeah.
You can say a sauna. I'll switch over. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So the sauna. So come take an evening sauna, and every week on Thursday nights, there's some men that come over and we sauna together and catch up on life and pray and do our best to get a little more real, which is still not my forte. Showing up is something I'm learning to do in my 30s, but that would be the site where you would get the best picture of who I am becoming in this decade of my life.
That is sweet, Blaine.
All right, when are we going, Josh? Let's roll up.
You guys are in Colorado on occasion, so this is a standing offer. If you're on my side of the state, come have dinner in sauna and you'll see it for yourselves.
That's perfect. Man, that's a sweet way to explain it. I appreciate you explaining it in those 3 kind of levels, and I think that really does a lot of really cool justice, man. I appreciate that. It sounds like you're in the middle of pure life. You got the 2 young ones. So you have a daughter, is your other kid?
I have a son too, so I've got a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. But
that's awesome.
Am I right that you have 5 kids?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
God bless you. How?
This is why I don't remember the 30s. So
he doesn't remember their names. Kid 2, kid 5. I have to come over and make nicknames for him.
Man, so it's really sweet that you caught that early. The date nights, the intentional time with friends, the intentional time with family, the doing that stuff. So, because it does, like the old timers always say, but now we're saying it flies. So my oldest is now 16 and driving. I'm like, dang, you're just so little and awesome. You're still big and awesome now, but I don't ever see you. So anyway, that's sweet.
Oh, yeah. I'm on the phone with a guy who I met at a, training for church planters. That I'm not a church planter, but I kind of came in on the coattails of this man I knew and really like the guy who led the training. And so, kind of, hey, can I ask you some questions about life? And he and I were on the phone one time, and he said that you keep describing your desire to feel more at rest in your life. That's a feeling that comes when your time is aligned with your values, is his line. I went hair blown back in my falling apart 2006 CRV. I call it a truck. It's not a truck.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
went, wow, peace is what you feel when your time is aligned with your values. What are my values? And I don't know all of them, but most of us know the basics. We want to abide with Jesus.
Yeah.
And then there are people that matter to us that we want to spend time with. And those little baby steps that I'm making in this season are really paying dividends. So be encouraged, listeners, give it a try.
For sure. And you're doing it. We used to do a thing called PJ walks where the kids were little. We get in strollers and get them on PJs and walk. Eventually a couple of them would fall asleep. But that time is priceless. Like that became date night, so it's awesome, man. Well, I do want to get into your, kind of the timeline history a little bit. So for those who don't know, and I'm sure you may be tired of talking about that. You may love talking about it, but you are the son of John and Stacy Eldredge, who people may have heard of. They've done some things, written some books.
Once or twice.
So you grew up in Colorado. Was it Colorado Springs area? Was that where you
That's
spent your
right.
childhood? Okay. Now take us from what was it like growing up? And I don't know, I don't remember really when, I should know this, but when Wild at Heart and Captivating and all that kind of came out, but where were you age wise and kind of location wise in your, young Blaine days when all that kind of happened, and then track us to graduating and where'd you go and that type of thing? Unstuck Coaches hates it when movement and progress in a person's life or business is stuck or frozen or slowed or just stopped altogether. Well, we have found a solution. Unstuckcoaches.com. They offer a variety of coaching services to get you or your business moving again. Check out Unstuckcoaches.com.
Yeah, great question. I do not mind talking about this. I describe my dad as like a cross between Elijah the prophet and Willy Wonka, where he has a passionate life with God. He's freakishly smart. He loves to teach and make the way of Jesus accessible. And then he's also bizarre. He's a very intriguing person. And so I'm so glad. I love my dad. My dad and I had a great relationship growing up. We had a great relationship now, which is not to say we don't go at it every so often, because we do disagree pretty intensely sometimes, but we're getting a lot better at it. And he's been very gracious. So here are the highlights I would hit. When I'm 10, suddenly my dad writes a book that is used by God for lots of people. And that's really interesting. On the positive side, I got to see front and center as a boy the power of Jesus to change people. So again, just like kids know the real value system of the family, they know what you actually believe. Psychologists differentiate between 3 layers of belief, right? External beliefs, what you post on Facebook, want other people to think you believe. Internal beliefs, the story you tell yourself, what you want to say internally you believe. True beliefs, what you actually believe. And our lives tend to line up with our true beliefs. Your kids can tell you what you really care about. And so I can't tell you the major advantage to parents who believed in the power of Jesus to overthrow spiritual darkness, to speak to his people, to heal the human heart. And I'll tell you, I think if they're like me, unless there's significant adversity, people probably, teens to mid-20s don't quite know what they're motivated by. maybe. I'll just say that was my experience, where the complexity of growing up with parents who are being manifestly just used by God and seem to have all the answers that all kids think their parents have, was this feeling that got in of, my dad is really exceptional and being used by God. I know I'm not that exceptional. And I wasn't able to say until the end of my 20s how deep the belief got in that I know I'm not the kind of person that God would use, because I think that he uses special people. Now, that's not how it works. But if I think that God uses special people, and I think that my dad's gifting is the explanation of why he has the role right now that he gets to have, I went into fake it till you make it mode of, well, I'm just going to pretend that I'm deeply secure, that I can hear God, I know I'm loved, and I just know that I'm chosen. And the amazing thing is, the idea that there are exceptional people, is a myth that humans want to believe. And so people really were attracted to the confidence. And self-deception is a complex thing. So I couldn't even told you that I was posing or faking it.
Yeah.
I would just say, no, I really love Jesus, and I really love to see people encounter Jesus, and life is good. It wasn't until my mid-20s that the energy began to run out. And in the meantime, I had done the academic thing. I had planned to be a college professor until I was, halfway through my master's degree, PhD plans, and I looked at the plan of the secular academy to change humanity.
Yeah.
And thought, that is never going to work. It's just not going to work. Don't get me wrong. We're recovering from a little bit of an anti-intellectual season in the church in the West. So our brothers and sisters in Christ who are pursuing, higher education are a force for good. God bless you guys. For me, I needed to get out. But the dream, right? The dream had always been, I'm going to work with my dad, which I got to do because my brother and I had started a publishing platform writing about life in the 20s. And how do you become a man of character, adventure, beauty, love? How do all these things work? And the organization that had kind of grown up around my parents' work didn't have a young men's wing, probably because it doesn't need one. But we had one, and we thought, hey, this will be a great thing to bring in. And they agreed. And so two sides. On the one hand, it was so cool. I loved working alongside my parents for a time and in their organization. On the other, there just are no shortcuts in the masculine life. And there are certain things that every man has to do. Leave home. Throw down with his dad, come to terms with the story that he is telling himself about his life when that story fails. So I couldn't, near the end of my 20s, explain why there was so much frustration a few layers down. Intense anger, 2 layers down on that I would make up a story for, right? We're great at making up stories to explain the way we feel. And it just didn't quite fit until finally it hit a point where I thought, man, I just don't think I can keep working it well that hard. Why? Well, fortunately, I had a great counselor at the time. I had church people who had voices in my life, and they were able to say, it kind of looks like your story's falling apart a little bit, dude. Where you were trying, and what I would say is I was trying to draft off of my dad's chosenness, really believing that I was never the kind of person who would get to be invited into a cool story with Jesus. And I remember the day I was in my living room and I was like, Jesus, I just want to be with you. I know you're real. I've seen you move. I would start a neighborhood pizza shop if you were in it. I would go back to school. I don't care. And the invitation that I felt from God was, really? Leave your parents' organization.
It gives me chills hearing that story,
Man.
just thinking like how exciting is that if you're God and your son says that? Like, of course he's going to answer that prayer. But what a big request. But hang on, get time out right there. Man, thank you for sharing that. Like, I wouldn't have put those pieces together that happening to mom and dad and all that actually can create a bunch of false identities and like a level that you just feel like it just creates like issues of like I can't live up to that. And that just is not on the radar for something that I would have considered. I mean, that's really
Oh,
cool
you're
that you shared
welcome.
that, and I really appreciate that. And
It's
fast
something
forward
of an
just the anger
inevitable
thing.
pressure, right? Because people growing up would always ask me, do you feel pressure? And I think, no, I don't. And my parents have always been honestly very intentional in an attempt to disarm the pressure. There's just a certain element when there is a kind of perceived success that's not replicable. It's just inevitable where you go, what am I going to do with the fact that my parents were truly invited by Jesus to play a really rare role?
Yeah, but look what
And
you caught. So you graduate. And I want to get back to that prayer and that story, but you graduated. Did you leave Colorado or where'd you go when you graduated high school? Where'd you go to school? I know you ended up in British Columbia for your master's, but what about college?
yeah, I went first to California. I am convinced now, because of a field called epigenetics that's well worth discussing, that all people are designed with God to gravitate in conscious and unconscious ways towards their family story, looking for resolution. That's what I blame why I went to California, because my parents were from there and I thought it was going to be homecoming. And it was not so much a homecoming. So I started off in California, but it was in Santa Barbara that I had my primal experiences with the Holy Spirit. And there are certain things I think are very helpful for a young man in particular. And seeing God move is one of them. The sort of swashbuckling elements of the spiritual life are very important for a young man.
Mm-hmm.
There's an idea called stage theory. It's very old in Christian discipleship. That's like, hey, there are basically 3 stages to following Jesus. And young people, stage 1, God loves to teach them through success. It's the energetic outward journey. That was California and then later Washington State, where it was, wow, God is amazing. I saw people get healed miraculously and, began to enjoy worship for the first time in my life, and then became extremely disillusioned. And I have a hard time keeping my crises of faith in order, but one of them was emerging around that time when I moved from California to Washington State. I ended up graduating from a little Presbyterian university called Whitworth.
Okay.
Shortly thereafter, I met Emily. I was trying to volunteer at a climbing gym so I could climb for free, and Emily was my in. So that's how we got started. After a few years in Washington State, raising goats and working in schools, I moved to British Columbia. Again, I thought I was going to be a college professor. We were not there a very long time, though. My wife did not like it. I didn't actually love primarily urban living. My wife is a backwoods girl.
Yeah.
And I like open spaces too. So, Vancouver is a really cool city, especially to visit, I tell people. I think that I don't know if you have these friends who just love cities. I have a few of them who walk through a place like New York and are amazed
that are just
beauty of God. I'm like, not that guy. I'm not that guy.
I'm not either.
I feel so claustrophobic.
My neck already hurts. You just saying that. Ugh.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
lived in Times Square basically for a semester or a summer internship. So I know what you're saying. Yeah, keep
oh,
going.
no way, man.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes my stomach, makes my neck hurt. Yeah.
So we moved back to Colorado, gosh, like 7 years ago now. Uh, and then it's only in the season that I was leaving Wild at Heart, it was just your life got a whole new deck. So we sold the house that was on kind of the west side of town. We went for it with a homesteading, more rural dream, which we're, 3-ish years into. And now we live, roughly an hour, a little less than that if the traffic is good, outside of town, near a town called Peyton. It's about probably 100 people, which is where
Man,
we are now.
you getting snow already?
It's cold today, but not
Yeah.
yet.
Okay. That's awesome, Blaine. So between the time you landed your Wild at Heart times, I mean, so you had got your master's at that point, did the thing with Wild at Heart and Sons
That's
podcast,
right.
magazine, all that. Once that landed, um, where does that kind of fit in the timeline? And then when did you start researching and writing the book?
Yeah, this is a great
Like, when
question.
did that come on? Yeah.
I was joking. A friend of mine uh, fosters teenage boys, and which is awesome because in every foster system, the people that no one wants are teenage boys. It's really interesting culturally. There's a sociologist, Christian Smith, who pointed out that one of the problems in American cultures for young men is that no one wants them. So if you roll up to a playground and the high schoolers are playing their rowdy game there and it's a bunch of high school boys, there is a kind of revulsion that most people react with that I remember. But it's just a major problem. What do you do as a young man who's not being invited into a role, but instead is being told by culture, we don't want you here. You're never in the right place. Well, I have a buddy who's addressing a bit of that problem. And this theme was developing where all of these young men who would come through his life would have related names. And I was cracking up because I'm like, oh, Jesus is writing a story that has themes. He's a writer. And he said back, no way, man, because it's so confusing and stories make sense. And I laughed at him. I said, you are a writer and you think that stories make sense on the inside? They don't. And
Yeah.
it takes an incredible amount of patient observation to discern the threads of your own story. So I when I left Wild at Heart, it was the most profoundly disorienting season in terms of, man, what matters? All of that sense of significance stuff, all of that stuff, man, piled on it one time right around, and I can see the 30s coming on and just felt utterly confused. I was researching for a book, but I didn't know what it would be. And I was just following threads where I had started telling friends, hey, I think I'd like to write something about the story of the Old Testament, because at Deir Allah, which is in the Arabian desert, there's a ruin, and on the wall of this ruin, some words are cut. And you can tell when you sample the stone that they were painted with red ink. And upon translating it, they discovered that it was a prophecy of Balaam, son of Beor, who happens to
Oh,
show
wow.
up in the Bible. He
Yeah.
is one of the only non-canonical prophets, right? This man is not a prophet of Yahweh. He has a disturbing relationship with Shamash that showed up in the archaeological record. Balaam is terrible. And the
Wow.
prophecy is terrifying. He's kind of like the Merlin of the Old Testament. And when he shows up in the story, it shows you how dramatic the narrative has become. I was telling people, you know what's cool about the battle between Israel and the witch king Og, who's the last of the Rephaim, which is this quasi divine warrior king
Yeah.
clan, is that it took place at Eldredge. What's interesting about Eldredge is that if you're in Turkey, Turkey is famous for its underground cities. And if you do a Google search, Anatolia underground city, you'll see the 7 levels of these unbelievable underground labyrinths. Well, there are underground cities in the Levant as well. And one of them is underneath the hill at Eldredge. Why that matters is because Og was seen as a representative of the evil one, a representative of the king of the dead. And that battle, that historical battle, would have taken place in something akin to winding catacombs. And it would have been half in the underworld. And can you imagine having to flow into an environment like that one to fight someone who's a straight up witch king? It's unbelievable.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
gripping story. So I knew that I wanted to write, but I was trying to make ends meet, man. And in leaving, well, the heart, young men are great at ignoring all kinds of advice, even good advice.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what, man, God's going to provide. I have faith, and God has provided for sure. It's just been way more grinding than I would ever imagine. So I leave Wild at Heart, and I started a new platform. It's called Mount Vigil. I wanted to do more technical teaching on the story of God. And I thought the entire old audience would come, and they didn't. They wished me well. They said, hey, man, thanks for Ansons, and we're going to stay over here. No way. I kind of thought that all of these pieces would fit together in a way that made a little more sense. And I was finishing another writing project, and then, man, it was the season of throw everything at the wall and burn yourself out. So because I was homesteading, I was leading a thing called the Front Range Homestead Alliance of a bunch of, homesteads in the area. And it was the and it was terrible.
Yeah.
But eventually in the middle of that season, a few things started to become clear. One was, hey, I really now feel the need to write this book about the story of God in the Bible. Partly because I discovered there's a Christian think tank called Barna that is just something that people should know about. It's equivalent to what kind of the Pew Institute does internationally. They do research on the state of Christianity in the United States. And their conclusion is that we are past the point of irreversible decline in the Western church. I mean, there is conversion to Mormonism alone. Every day, a small church, more than 250 people, right, leaves Christianity for Mormonism. The numbers of leaving Christianity entirely are even more astonishing. It's like a 50% decline in practicing Christians over 20 years, which if you were someone who studied history and anthropology, it's called a population collapse, when the normal gears of culture stop functioning properly. Well, listen, we who are following Jesus here in the West are in the middle of a population collapse where a bill that originated in medieval Christianity is finally coming due. And we're feeling the aftershocks last in the United States. And depending on where you are in the country, you'll feel it later, but it's coming. Now, what does that mean for the disciple of Jesus? It means that the state of the church proper actually needs to inform your strategy for following Jesus, your priorities in your time. So if you are in the church's equivalent of peacetime, you can live in a certain way. But listen, friends, you just got to know that barring a move of God in our time, your job is to preserve a remnant. You are like King Josiah, and you need to prepare a few people to keep the flame alive into a new generation. I hope that comes as resonates with people, not as oh my gosh, I had no idea it was that bad, but oh my gosh, that's why it feels so hard right now. The data back up how it feels. So I thought, man, people really need an arresting display of Jesus. And I think they also need to be reminded of a few things. They need to be told how coherent the biblical story is. They need to be told how intelligent the biblical story is. They need to be told about its diagnosis of the human condition and just how complex it is. I was reading a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, my favorite Jewish atheist, fascinating person and a great writer. And his nomination for the greatest psychologist of all time was the Buddha. So much of Buddhism is ancient psychology gone bizarre. And I thought, man, have you seen the wisdom literature of the Bible? It's unbelievable. You want to talk complex human psychology? Look at the fact that Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job are all one thematic composition called wisdom. And it begins, the Latin education system had 3 layers called the trivium: grammar, what are the rules? Logic, how do you use the rules? Rhetoric, how do you make the rules? The Bible does something similar, but it's so much more sophisticated. Where it's like Proverbs, what's basically the good life? Work hard and don't sin. You're like, okay, a lot of this stuff makes a lot of sense. And then along comes Ecclesiastes, which goes, really though? Really? There's a lot of good people who suffer very deeply. If you consider that, then there's Job, which is the master class of the wisdom of God, which is, really? Can you perceive the complexity of God's universe?
Yeah.
The Bible is brilliant. And that is not, in my context, well understood. So it's not just the teeth of the Bible, it's the guts and the need to say, this is a beautiful story. So let me give you a telling that hopefully, Lord willing, will display some of the allure by sharing the stories as I would if we were around a fire together or if we were in the sauna.
Man, yes, and yes, and yes. Yeah, and I love that. I mean, just hearing it from you and the heart of this book and how it's portraying the Bible. I mean, it's exciting. Of course, we need that. And I mean, this is like the spark that's one of the pieces of the spark that's going. But kind of post Blaine writing the book versus before you wrote the book, what would you say you've learned about God or Jesus? Like some of the bigger things. I know that's a huge question, but like
that's a great question.
What would you say you've learned about even his nature or Jesus or what? So
I cried my way through this book, man. I'm almost embarrassed to say how many times that in the course of the reading. I say in the introduction, I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm just a fan of biblical scholars. And I'm also not a historian. I'm just a fan of history. I think these things are interesting. So there were so many moments that I would say, I had no idea the kind of king that you were. No idea the depth of your character. Let me give you a couple examples because King Jesus is unbelievably complex and wonderful. So get this. In ancient Israel, right? So we have David somewhere around the year 1000. Not a great time to be building an empire because you're living in the twilight zone of a civilizational collapse called the Late Bronze Age collapse. When the kind of proto-Vikings, there was a gigantic seafaring army from Europe that has an epic name. They were just called the Sea Peoples or the Sheridan, was roaming the Mediterranean, burning every major city in the world to the ground. In the aftermath of that, rebuilding a people out of the rubble, you have this figure, David. And it's pretty well known that his name means beloved. But what is less well known is that beloved becomes the code word of royal designation. And all through the Bible, when you are going to get a truly good king, someone in the story is going to assign the royal title. So when Nathan comes to assign Solomon as the successor, he says, you shall call him Jedediah, which is another form of the name beloved. When Josiah rolls onto the scene, 400 years later, his mom is named Jedidah, which is, female form of the name beloved. And there's this sign, wait a second, God, you are doing something, because the true king is not dead. The old hope is still flickering, and we're going to see another version of a truly good king. Well, when Mary of Nazareth comes along, she has an old Egyptian name, which means bitterness, but it also means beloved. So your ears start burning when this woman, Mary girl, is visited by an angel. You go, wait a second, you're going to have a son and your name's beloved. His name's going to be salvation. But at his baptism, what happens? He goes down to the waters, he comes up, the sky splits, and then God the Father designates him by a royal title.
Yeah.
What is it?
This is my son, whom I'm well pleased.
Yes, which
My
you can
beloved.
also translate the beloved.
Beloved, yeah.
And so anyone listening would go, bolt of lightning, did you hear what he just said? This is double underline, the beloved, the king who is like David, who displays the power, the virtue, the stern glory of God, and yet the kindness is here. Then you have this one. At Israel's waiting, it's fascinating. There's a pretty enthusiastic scholarly debate. Is Israel waiting for a king or a prophet? Because some of us are familiar that Messiah, Mashiach means anointed one, smeared one. And it was that someone was designated with oil to one of three offices: prophet, priest, and king. These are the three that are going to be anointed basically anywhere in the ancient world, honestly. And at the end of Deuteronomy, which is, the last of the books of the Torah, which is one literary composition, which is this epic, single dramatic narrative. And Moses is dying, and he goes away. His vigor is unabated, and yet the Lord, says it's your time. Then the editor cuts in. And in this passage of hope and yet indescribable sadness, the editor says, and since there has not arisen a prophet like Moses, who the Lord knew face to face. But Moses said before he died, I will raise up from among you, the Lord says, a prophet like me, and to him you shall listen. So they're waiting for a king, they're waiting for a Moses. Well, Jesus is greater than Moses is a big deal, because not only is he the prophet they've been waiting for, but the Exodus event is the template for salvation. And let me just tell you two things. One is that Matthew makes the point explicit in the way he designed his gospel account, because he gave it 5 acts modeled after the 5 books of the Torah. And then you have as the central scene, not Moses on Sinai giving a law, but Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. And he's delivering not a new law, but the original law, the law of Eden, because it's a law of the changed heart. More to the point, at the Mount of Transfiguration, when God speaks again, like he did at the baptism over Jesus, he says, this is my son, the beloved. And then he adds this line, to him you shall listen. Referencing a line that is, up to 1,500 years old of the apocalyptic prophet. The eschatological prophet is here. And can you believe it, that beyond all expectation, he's a man of mercy? Can you see that though he has the highest standards of any contemporary teacher by far, sinners love him and flock to him because of the beauty of his affection that transforms people? So just in general, the beauty of Jesus is hard to communicate. You really do need to come in and experience it. We didn't even talk about Jesus as the apocalyptic priest who comes in fulfilling all three roles. And many people think that David also, because he wore the ephod and did priestly things at a couple times, was a prophetic priestly king. And some church traditions assign him to the order of Melchizedek, which is cool. And so to have a king again who is a prophet defined by his intimacy with God, a king who has the royal title, and then a priest who can facilitate the marriage of heaven and earth is unbelievably good news.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could double this episode and keep talking about this. How would you let's kind of start wrapping it that way up. How would you encourage someone who's listening, and maybe you could say, like, here's kind of a message from my life to this point, and then I want to find out how can we get your book.
All right.
Encourage somebody, Blaine, right now, based on the book, based on your experience, because I go back to that prayer wherever you were saying, like, man, if you're in it, I don't care if it's a pizza shop, like, I want that. And now fast forward just so you can look at it. From us not knowing you, we can see it. But what a sweet answer to that prayer this book is a culmination of. And I know it didn't look like that in the weeds, but that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I hope this comes as an encouragement. As I try to slow down, what rises in me really is, for our friends listening, the difficulty is the key. The Anglican Bishop Tom Wright says that people have always been troubled by the dark thread that runs through the Old Testament narrative, just never going away, of suffering and death. And something is going to happen where God is going to have to enter death in some way, because the Psalms in particular overflow with these mysterious lines. Even those who have gone down to dust, those who could not keep themselves alive, will kneel before you. Or this one, even the dark is not dark to you. These are grim lines. And I can tell you that in my life, it actually is the pain, a lot of which we didn't get into, but I do write about in the book, and death in particular, that's the greater obstacle to encountering Jesus. And so my encouragement would be, Jesus is quite eager to encounter you in your disappointment, to encounter you in your pain. The mystery of Jesus descending into hell is that when you get into the dark moment, you don't so much have to cry out to a God who's far away. He's actually arrived first and is waiting for you. And so I would say, man, bless you for the encounter with Jesus, and to begin to open up the disappointment and the difficulty as a site of encounter will be well worth it, because I can assure you that Jesus wants you, that to abide in God, to see him face to face, is what you were made for. You can see more of him than you ever have before, because he wants to be found. You will not fail if you are calling out to the God who draws near to draw near to you. It may require inviting him to draw near to you in the very sites where you don't want to go, but it will be worth it if you will go there. So bless you, listeners, in Jesus' name.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's so good. Okay, Blaine, how can we get a copy of this? And you may have not have this on the plans or not, but are you going to do this in Audible for us? For us audio people as well?
It is out in an audiobook, friends.
Oh, yes. Okay, how do we get it?
It's quite easy. I self-published this book because of a wild story that we're out of time for, but it is available on Amazon. And for right now, is the only place. You can go to Amazon, you can search The Paradise King, you'll find it. The audiobook is distributed a little more widely wherever you get your audiobooks, Audible, iTunes. It should be on all of the places. If you want to just read a chapter, you can go to my website, which is blaineeldredge.com. And there's a little, type in your email to get a chapter. Originally, type in your email so that I can tell you when the book is out. You are allowed to unsubscribe, friends, immediately. There was not a better way to encode that PDF onto the site. So if you would like to read what it is, that's one place you could do it.
That's cool, man. Thank you, Blaine. This was great, man. I appreciate your the passion that's coming from you for this, and the fact that, I mean, I wrote a few things down, but I love the Jesus is quite eager to encounter you in your difficulty and pain, because I think it's that like disorientation you've heard. That's like a disorientation, reorientation. It's just like that's part of it, and that's like you said in there one time. Really difficulty is the key. I mean, it's just that reorienting and get you to Jesus. So all that, man, it's all good. It's so good. And I can't wait to get the book myself and listen to it, read it, and hand it out. So you guys check it out, blaineeldredge.com. Get a free copy. Go to Amazon, go to Audible, and we'll look forward to the next kids version, Blaine.
Right on. Thank you for being so generous with your show. It has been so fun to talk with you guys and to make occasional digital eye contact with Micah. Love what you guys are doing. So bless you guys.
Thanks, Blaine.
Thank you for joining us on this latest edition to the Storyfield podcast. We hope that you have been challenged, inspired, and ready to take that next step, whatever that is. If you know someone with an amazing story that needs to be heard, send us an email at info@thestoryfield.com. Have a fantastic day, and we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of The Storyfield.